we had a fight night. It is exciting. We had a fight night, UFC 249, live from Jacksonville, Florida, and it was an absolute thriller. It really, really was. Which, first of all, I think that just has to be, we have to have gratitude towards the fighters and the performances they put on. It was an incredible night, newsworthy night. I thought a star-making night in a lot of ways, which was fantastic, and a lesson. I think a night we could take away a lot of stuff from, and when we do these post-fight recaps and we try and dictate things and storylines and directions and where things are going and what these people are going to be, maybe we should just take a step back every once in a while and think, hey, maybe there's a chance these guys can turn things around and become pretty fantastic. So it was wild. It was a stressful weekend in regards to the fight week because you did have the news of Jacare Souza testing positive for COVID-19. 2 of his team members. They did test everybody else. Nobody else tested positive. I believe they're testing everybody on the way out of this because, Jacksonville is going to be their hub for the next 10 days or so. So I did, there was part of me that was thinking with all the stuff that was going down on Friday night, early into Saturday morning, were we going to have UFC 249? Disney had already kind of buckled once to public pressure. That more had some governmental step in where, government didn't really have regulations and they were just hoping, all right, maybe they'll just do a solid for a big company that's in our state. This wasn't going to be the case. You thought for Florida, Florida, we're opening up, Palm Beach County's opening up Monday. Miami-Dade is planned to open up in a week after that. So certainly Florida's been a little bit more loosey-goosey when it comes to the COVID-19 pandemic. And again, we've spent so much time talking about it, and we've spent a lot of showtime dedicated to, is it right to do this? Is it not right to do this? Look, I really want to get into the fights because it was such a thrilling night of competition, of athletic competition. Those guys really did put their heart and souls on it and really did feel like they put a show on it. So as much as I'd love to banter about the whole Jacare Souza, did the UFC act irresponsibly, I don't think anybody's mind is going to get changed in this. I made my point clear when the whole Khabib versus Tony Ferguson thing was going down that I didn't think they should have done the fight without fans. It was the fans' fight. But it became very clear what their president was going to do. So, the idea that even with a COVID-19 test popping up positive and still putting an event on, in a weird lot of ways, I thought that it was a little bit refreshing. So I really think that from this standpoint, Jacare's testing positive is a huge bummer. It's not that surprising because he had family members around that he was dealing with it. But look, I think we got plenty of time to dive into that stuff. I really, really do. I'm not trying to skate on it. It's just, I don't know what in depth we could get into it. I think if you're disgusted by the UFC and then putting on shows, I'm not here to convince you otherwise. Feel how you want to feel. Ultimately, I enjoyed the hell out of watching sports last night. So I missed it. And those guys put on an awesome performance for a television audience. Nobody in the building, which I'm sure was weird for a lot of them. Not completely foreign. I mean, they've all been on regional shows and small shows before, but to do it in front of absolutely nobody, no reaction, no pop, nobody to get you going. From my standpoint, I just don't think that I want to hit that exercise right now because those athletes put on a fantastic show last night and they were awesome. And I was very, very thankful for it. I was thankful to have ultimately the UFC back in my life. And that's really what I came out of it with. And I did come out of it with a little bit more of, I don't want to say hope, but it was nice. It was just nice. It just felt back to normalcy of kicking back and watching fights and going back into the realm of, oh, yeah, this is what this feels like. And it didn't hurt that the fights were really awesome. So that's kind of where I want to go with this. I think that we can get into the whole pandemic thing. I got a 4-hour radio show 5 days a week. I'll hit it at some point during there. For this one, let's start off with the main event, which was Justin Gaethje versus Tony Ferguson. And I'm one of these people, like, if I have a prediction that's dead wrong, boom, I raise my hand and I say it was dead wrong, because I said that I thought Tony Ferguson was too much for Justin Gaethje on under normal circumstances. Certainly under shortened circumstances, I thought that he was really up against it, a guy in Tony Ferguson who just, he feels like he doesn't feel human, and I don't think that really changed. Just because I saw a guy get beat tonight doesn't mean I really feel Tony Ferguson is human. But I do think the world of Justin Gaethje now. I think that a lot has to be said for what he has done, because this is a guy who came into the UFC, from the World Series of Fighting, a wrecking machine, a guy who could just out-tough everybody, out-violent everybody. And that was kind of his best skill set that everybody kind of saw on the surface. Yeah, he had the great leg kicks, and, he's a tremendous striker and all that type of stuff, but he was one of those guys who was kind of out-tough the tough. And, you think back to his Michael Johnson fight, just the comeback that he had where he was getting cracked early, looked really bad for him. And, and he was able to bail himself out. And then, tough losses to Eddie Alvarez, who at one point was the cream of the crop at 155. And then Dustin Poirier, who certainly has been a perennial top 5 contender now, top 3 contender now at 155 pounds. And he looked a little outclassed, especially from a technical standpoint, that he wasn't just going to be able to go and out tough these guys. And I think a lot of people, and I'll include myself in that regard, just thought maybe this was just a little bit cut above of where he was ready to go. And that just speaks, I think, to the greatness of these athletes and these combat athletes to really go in there and work on themselves. And he came in with just such a vengeance, steamrolling fools. Edson Barboza, James Vick, Cowboy Cerrone, just these thunderous, vicious wins to really put himself back on the map. And tonight was next level, because I thought that if he was going to beat Tony Ferguson, I mentioned this last week, that it had to be done the way he was winning these fights. He had to do it quickly. And if this fight went into deep waters, he was going to be in deep bleep. It was going to be it was going to be tough sledding for him the entire way. And it was the opposite. There was it felt like there was a moment in that fight where it was starting to turn towards Tony Ferguson. And it was the end of that second round, obviously. Not just the fact that it ended with a vicious uppercut where he was kind of saved by the horn, but it just felt like the tide was starting to turn. Like, you could see the gas tank was starting to erode a little with Justin. He was going for broke on everything. He was really trying to eradicate the boogeyman in Tony Ferguson. And you really got to give credit to Justin Gaethje, and you got to give credit to his coach Trevor Whitman for saying, take a little steam off this, because when it was coming from a technical standpoint, it wasn't even close striking wise. I mean, he was beating Tony to the punch on everything. He was better as far as getting the better shots. It really was just a case of, Tony's best asset has always been he can go harder, longer than anybody else. And it felt very kind of similar to the Anthony Pettis fight, where it was off to a tough start for him, but he was, he came back and really put it on him. A little bit similar to Cerrone, even though he had that one a little bit better handled. That, he lets these guys hit the floor on their gas tank, and then boom, he takes advantage of it. But this was different. Everybody looked at that second round and probably thought, and I know I did, I tweeted out, business has just picked up for El Kukui. I thought the tide's turning. This is where it's going to end, and it didn't. Justin was fantastic. He was hitting Tony with just such hellacious stuff. So I think it's one of those things where you're almost wowing the guy surviving more than the guy dishing out the damage, because of how crazy it is that any human being can withstand what he's doing. But he was a truck the rest of the way, man. He was a Mack truck, and Tony was just really just staying in the middle of the road. Couldn't get anything going too much. Didn't get those. He was getting chewed up with those leg kicks, which many opponents do against Justin Gaethje. But one thing that we didn't really get to see from Tony that was a big signature is the elbows, which lets you know that it was tough dealing with the punishment of getting inside on Justin. Justin, because you got to be close range with that kind of stuff, and Tony just couldn't. It really just wasn't worth the price of admission for him. So I mean, there's a couple things that go through your mind from this. Is just one, what a tremendous completion and turnaround from Justin Gaethje, who didn't even want the interim belt, which is a complete badass move. Is to so many people are pining for interim titles, interim this, interim that. And I could take him or leave him. It's kind of been numb to many UFC fans at this point, but he looks upon it as a fake belt, doesn't want it, and I think a lot of people thought that was a badass move. And just to think that, maybe this guy looked a little bit outclassed not that long ago. Just a little bit outclassed by the best in this division. Now looks like a guy who beat the best guy in the division. Or arguably the best guy in the division. So, and he made it clear he wants Tony. There was no Connor call out. There was none of that stuff. That he is, there's a real pride in himself going and beating the guy who's 28-0, who the real champion is. And he doesn't need a fake belt to fortify anything. And I think, and that says something, because I think anybody who's a fight fan knows what he just did to Tony Ferguson. Stopping Tony Ferguson. Think of it. Stopping Tony Ferguson is crazy. It's insane. You can't even wrap your mind around it. He hasn't lost in 7 years. Longer than that. I think 2012, 8 years. So it's a wild performance from him. It really, really is. As far as Tony's concerned, man, my heart just bleeds for him. That is a guy who, he has been, you've been wanting him to get this justification for so long that maybe he is the best lightweight on the planet, and, has had things just slip out of his control most of the time, mostly because, one, he's not the biggest star, doesn't have this crazy bitter feud with Conor McGregor. Is a little bit of a weird guy. Had some mental things that he was going through. Had a horrible injury while he was interim champion, so he had his interim strap taken away while he was doing media for the UFC. And you think, man, this will at least be the day where, with the world shut down, with no sports, all eyes can be on Tony Ferguson in what's been the best division in the UFC, to show he's the best fighter, or has a claim to be the best fighter. And that's this sport. That's combat sports, man. That's and I think especially with mixed martial arts, it doesn't, those showcase fights, they just don't work out that way, even though if it seems like everything is set up for you for it to be be there for you. And I don't think we're going to get Tony versus Khabib now. I don't know. Maybe Tony will, I'm not saying that Gaethje's going to go and beat Khabib, because this is a completely different matchup. I think Tony just had some unique stuff for Khabib that I don't know that Gaethje does. I don't know that Gaethje can prevent Khabib from taking him down, even though he has a great wrestling background. We don't see it much from him. Maybe he can inflict pain on Khabib and those leg kicks, and Khabib won't be able to take him down. I don't know. I'm not saying he can't either one way or the other. I'm just saying that I think a lot of people looked at the riddle of Nurmagomedov and thought Ferguson was maybe even a tougher riddle. And so, it's kind of like, now what for him? Where do we go with Tony Ferguson at this point? Because is Conor going to fight him? I mean, I would highly doubt it unless, Conor thinks I'm taking on an old fighter, 36 years old, who just took the beating of his life. So now he could really, go demolish or kind of finish what Justin Gaethje started. Maybe he thinks that. I mean, Tony certainly, look, if there's anything that you can say about Tony tonight, he looked very susceptible to that left hook. Conor, different stance. He's a southpaw, but of course has that monster left hand. So does he look at Tony and look at that and say, I can pounce on that opportunity now and make myself undeniable. Nobody can say anything. This is Tony Ferguson, the most unstoppable force there was. Now I go beat him. Boom, I move right back to the top of the line. I don't know. It'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see what comes of that. I think that that's a possibility. If Tony wants to come back and if he took a beat, I would hope. This is what I would hope. I would hope that Tony Ferguson takes his time after a fight like that and doesn't fight for a while. Like, we don't see Tony Ferguson maybe till the end of the year. But he's a prize fighter. And if that golden ticket of Conor McGregor comes a knocking, would he speed up the process and fight him in July? Maybe. I don't know. As far as, and so I will say this, like, look, I know that there was some talk of wanting him, he wanted to go out on a shield. He wanted to get finished. Justin felt bad. Justin said, I would die in here. It's all very respectful. And I think people who aren't fighters probably can't relate to this. I can tell you, as a guy who loves watching the sport, is a big fan of Tony Ferguson's. And I was texting with my buddy after the card was over. I wanted no part of seeing Tony in that 5th round. It wasn't like it didn't feel like the magic was there was any Hail Mary there for him, and we're not used to seeing in mixed martial arts the towel getting thrown in per se. I was glad Herb Dean stopped it when he did. I thought it could have actually even been stopped earlier. It's just not. We just don't. You really just in MMA. It really just needs to be like, oh, a guy is if the guy is still standing and not in a compromising position like the co-main event, and we'll get to that. It's really rare to just see a ref step in front and just wave it off. But Tony was like, you felt like you were watching years get taken off his life in that fight. To really put it bluntly, that's the kind of performance Justin Gaethje put on him. So a great performance from Justin, a star-making performance, I think, for sure. I think a lot of people feel like the way he dismantled Tony Ferguson, they do feel like he can go beat Nurmagomedov. That remains to be seen, but I am looking forward to that fight. I think Justin Gaethje has come full circle. He's earned that. And I hope that that's just what they go to. It's a shame that we never got Tony versus Khabib. And even if we do get it down the road, like let's say Tony fights Conor, and let's say Khabib beats Justin, and let's say we get that, end of the year or early 2021, whatever they try and do it. It's not going to quite be the same. It's just not going to quite be the same, at least from where I'm standing now. I mean, maybe Tony could go out there and he could flatline Conor McGregor and he's all the way back. But right now, it feels like the lost fight, and it doesn't feel like it ever could be what it was. And so that's a huge bummer. But on the bright side of that, Justin Gaethje has put himself in position to now be the guy at 155. I think made a lot of fans tonight. And, I'm sure if you're him, you have Khabib in your crosshairs. And if you beat him, him and Conor have kind of been jawing back and forth. And there's been rumors of that fight happening. And you know what the funny thing is now he's actually in, I think, a better position, because I think that fight will do a lot better for him. Conor fights are always a monster, but I would say, of all the things they've kicked around on Conor versus Justin Gaethje, you were kind of just like, all right, I mean, yeah, I'll see. It's going to be a fun fight. But now I feel like you got a guy who's got like some A1 credentials behind him. And I think with Conor and all that stuff, that's going to make it even bigger if they ever do square off. We had a co-main event, bantamweight championship on the line. Henry Cejudo was taking on Dominick Cruz, who replaced Jose Aldo, COVID-19. So they went with the former bantamweight champion. Henry Cejudo won to get himself a legend on the resume. And, I thought in this one, this was, I think this was like the lone fight I had right tonight. It felt like I was whiffing all over the place. So Henry Cejudo, he ends up getting the win. He finishes Dominick Cruz second round, hits him with a knee, vicious knee. First of all, big story of it, he's hitting him with leg kicks straight ahead, not really getting hypnotized by the movement of Dominick Cruz. Didn't feel shook by it at all, which I do feel like, the uniqueness of Dom, I do feel like has been shattered a little bit as the years have gone on. It's just not as unique to see a guy. Maybe he moves more than other people, but I just don't think it shakes. TJ Dillashaw kind of stole that style a little bit. Cody Garbrandt a little bit. Everybody kind of watched Dominic do that thing, and we saw Cody outshine Dominick Cruz with that same kind of style too, with the movement. So, I just don't think Henry was shook by it. He just kind of went straight forth with it, and went at Dom's legs, which have been a propensity to get injured. So why not, go to the root of his problems? But just didn't seem shook by it at all. Didn't really look for the takedowns or anything like that. It was just kind of this one flat out run, and it did seem like Dom was getting a little bit of his range going in the second round, but then they had a nasty clash of heads. Cejudo was cut open. They go back going, and I don't know if it's just a case of urgency because Cejudo was cut, so maybe he was feeling it, but he bull rushed it. He hit him with this really close range knee to the head, and I mean Dom was hurt bad. He hit him with a nice right hand, followed it up, and then was hitting him with some shots. And Keith Peterson stopped the fight. Stopped the fight. Dom pops right back up. And, a lot of people were thinking, oh, bad stoppage. Dom looks good. This is always a tough thing with the referees because, and this kind of goes back to what we were saying with what Herb did stopping the Tony Ferguson thing is like, it's a thankless job. But you don't want, like, if the guy always had to be unconscious when they make the decision, you're not really protecting him from himself. And with this case of Dominick Cruz, he's getting 11 unanswered shots, and Keith Peterson's looking at him. He's on the floor, and it's kind of hard to see where momentum's going. Maybe the body is responding a little bit, but if he doesn't step in there, does Henry Cejudo hit him with another knee and it flatlines him? Like, they're not all obvious like the heavyweight fight that we'll get to, obviously, between Ngannou and Rozenstruik, where a dude's dead up against the fence. And so, while I feel for Dominick Cruz, because maybe he wasn't completely put out, and now Cejudo's had a couple of these on his resume where he beat TJ Dillashaw, and people question, was it too fast? Or, one of the things with Henry is like, it's not like these are coming out of nowhere. These aren't like, this isn't Ben Askren versus Robbie Lawler where it's just like, oh, I thought the guy was unconscious and he clearly was just laying there or was just there resting or anything like that. Dom was getting the business put on him. He really was. And so while it sucks for him because it's 4 years out and, he's in a championship fight, I also just don't think he did himself any favor, so I really can't take anything away. Other big story that came out of this was Henry Cejudo retired. He says he's done fighting. He's done everything there is to do. He's 32 years old, and he's ready to wrap it up. There were some, apparently Joe Rogan says that he had heard some things, and DC said he heard some things in regards to he wanting to get paid more. He's done this whole Triple C thing, and best combat sports athlete of all time, the king of cringe and all that type of stuff. I do think this is what I think with the Henry Cejudo thing, with the whole king of cringe. I do think in ways, I think it helped him with, the niche mixed martial arts media and all that type of stuff. But I don't think it's one that really got him over as a star. And I think that for him, it's funny, they had this performance tonight. They honored George St. Pierre tonight. He's gonna be going to the Hall of Fame. And I really think that, you think about how far people have come. And I think that you think about this guy bouncing back from the Mighty Mouse loss that he had and where he got to, and just how well-rounded he is. I mean, the wrestling, he's got a gold medal in wrestling, and the type of way he's finishing people for a guy of his size, and good strikers too. Dominick Cruz, Marlon Moraes, TJ Dillashaw. These are guys he's stopping. And you think of that resume and you think like you should, it's like one of those things where I think the King of Cringe thing was just almost a miss for him, because you're almost being so goofy you forget about how much of a good fighter the guy is, or just what his resume has put forth. And so, do I believe that he retired? I don't even know, like, because he's like such a hacky WWE guy where people are trying to, I guess, boo him. I don't get it, and I guess maybe that's the point. I just like, it's a big whiff for me with whatever Henry Cejudo is trying to do to get himself over or get himself booed or whatever it's supposed to be. Because I feel like his resume is just one of those where this dude is like the All-American hero, All-American hero, also is, Latin American, and, could speak, could cross over markets, and, is an Olympic champion, and is a 2-division champion, and is finishing legends and all that. Like, he just doesn't need the goofy gimmick, like, it's kind of like Colby Covington. Like Colby Covington with the MAGA stuff and the Donald Trump stuff. It's like, you knew he was going in a specific lane to just get hated, but Colby also just didn't have the resume quite yet. Like this Triple C thing and this King, it kind of just came out of like after he already had the big wins. And it's like, you dethroned Mighty Mouse, you beat TJ Dillashaw, you beat Marlon Rice, become a 2-division champion. It's like, do you really need all of this? So I don't even know. Is the retirement legit? Nobody on social media, myself included, thinks it is. I'm like, no effing way. John Jones is like, sounds like a contract play to me. And he's not the only fighter to say that. I don't buy it. I think we'll see Henry Cejudo in a year's time. Maybe he wants some time off. I know he did have a long layoff and got shoulder surgery, but I do think that as good as he is, this whole King of Cringe thing was like a weird misstep, because, man, if you just sometimes I step back at these guys, like I look at a Colby Covington with how good a fighter he is, and I look at a guy like Henry Cejudo, and I'm like, man, I know that it does get you noticed in some ways, and I do think with Colby, it certainly got him enough hate from other fighters, even people at his own gym. Like it's a guy who's like lived the gimmick where people are like, oh, no, he's not really like that, and then they're kind of just like, nah, F that guy, he's still saying that. But when he steps in the cage, the dude's a really, really good fighter. Same thing with Henry. It's like, all right, King of Cringe, cool. Like, so are you really retired? Is this a gimmick? I don't know. Dana White did say that they're going to have a bantamweight. They're going to have a bantamweight title fight coming up. They're going to figure it out this week. It's going to be Petr Yan against somebody, as I believe was his quote. I would guess Aljamain Sterling. I would guess, but we don't know for sure. But I do think it's a bummer, because now not only do you have flyweight, which Henry vacated up in the air because of the last one ending with the winner who missed weight. God, what the hell was the dude's name? It escapes me right now. Shows you about the flyweights. But now you're in a position where now 135 you got to kind of figure out. And 135 I thought was kind of humming a couple of years ago, but now Henry leaves. Maybe that'll be enough to get him a new contract if he wants, or maybe he really is retiring. Who knows? So there's that. Now let's get to the fight. The dude who I think, no question, I think made himself the biggest star of the night, and that was Francis Ngannou. And we had John Anik on this week during fight week, and he was adamant. He's like, if we get a belt around Francis Ngannou, you're talking about like an uber star for the UFC. So who's the next star of the UFC? Who's going to be the next breakout guy? Francis Ngannou is. He's like an Avenger. He's a cartoon come to life. Like that's the kind of scary this guy is when he steps into that cage. And I gave a lot of respect to Jarzinho Rozenstruik for taking this fight, for calling out this fight. And we had Rozenstruik on, and he said that he was going to knock him out for sure. Look, came out with a little bit of kickboxing, and maybe it bothered Ngannou, maybe it didn't, but Ngannou was like, F that, and just started throwing nuclear bombs at Rozenstruik. A haymaker basically landed right on his chin, and he was out. And he's at that point where he's just got some of these cartoonish knockouts over him. And Rozenstruik's on the menu, and Cain Velasquez busting them up. He's just got these freak knockouts. And again, it kind of goes, like I said, this was kind of the theme of the night of all these guys who maybe bit off a little bit more than they could chew early on in their careers. And you kind of write them off. You write off of Justin Gaethje. You're like, nah, dude's a World Series of fighter. World Series of fighting champion. He ain't a UFC champion. Henry Cejudo, he's all right, but not good enough to beat Demetrius Johnson. And Ngannou, like another guy who had that freak knockout against Francis Ngannou, against Alistair Overeem, excuse me, and has the match against Stipe and just gets outclassed. Now, in getting outclassed, Stipe has not sounded the same as a human being when he talks since fighting Francis Ngannou, but had that fight, and then kind of was thrown under the bus by Dana White. Was seen as a guy who had Mr. Ego, wasn't falling in line with all that stuff. So, he's kind of getting written off by the company, which was really getting behind him and saw the star potential of obviously what he could be. Then he had the Derek Lewis fight. Atrocious fight. Not that he got humiliated, but just not, we were all licking our chops that's how you come back. And it was terrible. And he admitted to being shook, being shaken in that fight. And you just think about what the guy has turned himself into from that and going on the run that he's gone on to get back to where he is now. Just speaks to a great level of character from him. And you got to give him all the props in the world. And I hope that the same thing is going to be true of Jarzinho, that I think that guy won 4 straight last year, and he took a home run cut to get to the top and called out Francis Ngannou. It was a crazy move, bit off more than he could chew probably, and got beaten 20 seconds by UFC Drago. But I hope that this isn't written off that, that dude was a flash in the pan. No, man. This is a guy who comes from a country where there is no fight background. Basically, it's like him and Tyrone Spong. Those are the only guys from Suriname who fight. So it's very new to their culture. And he's got the burden of being kind of the face of that for a nation. So I hope that he takes what Francis did, what Cejudo did, what Justin Gaethje did, and run with it. I hope that nobody boxes him in and says, this is what you are now. You are this this one-hit wonder, this one-year wonder, if you will. I hope that that's not the case for Rozenstruik, because I think he's got a lot of potential. But for Francis, look, they got to figure out what's going on with Stipe and DC. It was one of the things, like we talked about interim titles not wanting a fake championship and the move that Gaethje pulled. But the difference with this is, and I told you this when I talked to Rozenstruik, is the reason I agreed with this being an interim championship fight is because, similar to what you have with now in the bantamweight division, I do think it's going to be a problem if DC goes and beats Stipe and that's it for DC and he retires. Like, where do you go from there? So I'm just looking at it from the standpoint of, you know, if Cormier ends up winning, you know, is he going to be, you know, they were joking back and forth with John and a guy, you want a piece of him, you don't want a piece of him. You know, I don't think DC's scared of I don't think he's scared of Francis Ngannou, but he's been talking about retirement forever now. And, you know, Stipe's already beat him. You know, if you're Stipe Miocic and you go and beat Daniel Cormier, like, honestly, if you're Miocic, what's left for you? You beat the holy hell out of Francis. And look, man, just listen to his interview. You don't sound the same. You really want to go out there again and take on the guy and see if you can get through another 25 minutes without getting bombarded again. I mean, I hope the money's right. I hope it's real right for Stipe. So that's all I was thinking. Like, if you were gonna, if any fight deserved an interim title, certainly Tony deserved to fight for a title because he was showing up and cutting weight twice in 3 weeks and all that stuff. Crazy person. But this one I thought made sense because I do think there's genuine question marks with where the division stands. And with that being the case, those are the times where I think interim titles really are appropriate. So that's those are some of the monsters out of UFC 249 and the big headlines out of last night. Greg Hardy ended up getting a win. Calvin Kattar versus Jeremy Stephens was awesome. Awesome fight. Calvin Kattar got a vicious win over Jeremy Stephens. Greg Hardy against Jorgen De Castro. Not the fight you'll remember the most out of this, but look, Greg Hardy is continuing to get wins. My only thing with Greg Hardy has been, and he certainly got a lot of respect with what he did with the Volkov thing. You know, the only thing I've always said with Greg Hardy is, with the star, like with all the controversy that it was actually a weird thing with Greg Hardy tonight because he didn't have any crowd reaction at all with it, so it kind of wasn't even like a thing to think about what the Greg Hardy reaction is. But you know, he's always going to be in those prominent spots, pay-per-view card, co-main on a fight night, all that type of stuff. But I really just don't feel like we've seen like that highlight. We haven't had a Francis Ngannou moment with Greg Hardy since he was on Contender Series. And I think a lot of people thought when he did what he did to Austin Lane in the Contender Series, we were going to get that all the time with Greg Hardy, and I don't think that's really been the case. So, yeah, that's really, I don't have much on it as far as is he going to be a contender. I still think he's got a long way to go. I do think he was taking on an injured opponent tonight too, but he does trudge on. Look, his record is now 6-2. One of those losses is a disqualification, and one of those losses is to a top 10 opponent. So, he's doing what he should do for a guy who hasn't been in the game that long. So it's not one of these nights where I want to take a lot of credit away from Greg Hardy for sure.